Hello, my name is Sandy. I am 60 years old. And for most of my life, I learned to swallow my own pain just to keep the peace inside my own home. Last month, after he savagely kicked my dog Buddy and then struck me across the face, something inside me went silent. Not out of fear, but out of a calm I had never felt before. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply looked at Buddy trembling in my arms and promised him, without saying a word, that this would never happen again. The next morning, I prepared the most beautiful feast I had ever made in my life. The whole house smelled like rosemary, warm bread, and slow-cooked hope. When he sat down at the table, he smirked and said, "You finally learned." But then, his face drained of color. His hands shook. Because right there, sitting calmly at the table beside my dog, was someone he never expected to see again. In that moment, the air shifted heavy, electric, almost humming with truth that had been buried for far too long. I watched him freeze, watched the fear spread through him the way he once tried to spread through me, and for the first time in years, I felt free. But this is only the beginning of what happened. And trust me, the full story is even more unbelievable than this moment. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love reading your messages and knowing where you are in the world. Now, let's uncover how this story truly began. I didn't sleep that night, not really. I drifted in and out of a shallow, trembling half-rest, the kind that keeps your eyes open even when they're closed. Every time I blinked, I saw the moment again. Marcus's boot hitting Buddy's side, the helpless yelp that tore from my dog's throat, the way his body curled inward in surprise and pain. And then the sting on my cheek, the heat of his palm, the shock of being struck by the very child I once held against my chest to calm his fevers. I whispered to myself that it had been an accident, that he hadn't meant to kick Buddy that hard, that he hadn't meant to lose control. But denial is a thin blanket against a cold truth. I stayed silent. Not because I was afraid of Marcus, not in the way most people imagine fear, but because mothers carry a strange, impossible hope that their children will one day return to the best versions of themselves. It's a hope we cradle even when it has turned to shards inside us. Buddy lay on the floor beside my bed, whimpering softly each time he shifted. I stroked his fur with a trembling hand, guilt heavy in my throat. "I'm so sorry," I whispered into the dark. My cheek still burned from the slap, but the ache in my heart throbbed far deeper. By dawn, the house smelled of something warm and familiar. Something inside me had cracked open during the night, spilling out an eerie, steady resolve. So while Marcus and Vanessa slept in the master bedroom they'd claimed as if it were a prize they'd won, I moved through the kitchen with a strange, quiet calm, steak sizzling in the pan, eggs whipped into a golden froth, biscuits rising in the oven, their buttery scent filling the house with memories of happier mornings. Fresh oranges pressed until their juice stained my fingertips. It wasn't a peace offering. It was a signal to myself more than to anyone. By the time Marcus finally dragged himself downstairs, Buddy was sitting beside me, his tail tapping the floor every few seconds as if encouraging me. I placed a plate on the table just as Marcus appeared at the foot of the stairs, rubbing sleep from his eyes and wearing that lazy entitlement he seemed to believe was his birthright. He stopped in the doorway and scoffed. "Well, look at that," he said, stretching his arms. "You learned at last." "Learned what? Submission? My place?" The idea used to sting. This morning, it simply floated past me like smoke. His smirk faltered when he noticed Buddy sitting proudly at my side, as if claiming his rightful spot. Then his gaze shifted to the dining table, specifically to the man already seated there. A man in a tailored charcoal suit, posture impeccable, hands folded neatly in front of him. Marcus froze. "What is this?" he demanded, but the words came out thinner, quieter than he intended. A flicker of unease passed through his eyes, like a man sensing a storm right before the first lightning strike. The stranger rose smoothly, buttoning his jacket with the kind of precision that only comes from both confidence and practice. His expression was calm, almost gentle, but there was a firmness beneath the surface, a steel Marcus had never learned how to handle. He extended his hand toward my son. "Good morning, Marcus. I'm Robert Chun, your mother's attorney." The air in the room shifted instantly, as if the walls inhaled. I watched Marcus's face drain of color, watched the cocky slouch of his shoulders tighten, watched his mind scramble through the last 6 months of entitlement, cruelty, and manipulation, as if trying to guess which of his sins had finally come back to bite him. Standing beside Buddy, my hand resting on his fur, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Power. Not the loud, boastful kind. Not the kind Marcus wielded when he yelled or slammed doors or took what wasn't his. This was a quiet, anchored power rooted in dignity, in self-respect, in the simple act of saying enough. My voice, when it finally came, surprised even me. "Sit down, Marcus." He didn't move. Neither did I. For a moment, the world narrowed to a single fragile line between us, mother and son, victim and abuser, past and present. I could feel every heartbeat of the last 6 months, every insult, every demand, every moment of walking on eggshells in a house that used to feel like home. And then, slowly, Marcus obeyed. He sat. Robert opened his briefcase. Buddy leaned into my leg, warm and steady, as if reminding me that I wasn't alone this time. And for the first time in years, maybe decades, I let myself believe that the nightmare I had been living might finally be coming to an end. I didn't know yet whether the path ahead would be painful, messy, or frightening. But I knew this. I was done disappearing. I used to think a good heart could fix anything. That kindness was a sort of glue capable of holding broken people together. For most of my life, it felt true. I volunteered at the church, helped neighbors who couldn't help themselves, fostered rescue dogs that had been abandoned or mistreated. I believed, truly believed, that everyone deserved a second chance. Maybe even a third. I told myself that compassion wasn't weakness, that giving was a kind of quiet strength. But sometimes, a good heart becomes an open door that the wrong people walk through without wiping their feet. When Marcus called me that day 6 months ago, his voice tight with desperation, I didn't hesitate. "Mom, it's just temporary," he'd said. "Just until I find work." He sounded so much like the boy I used to tuck into bed, the boy who used to draw me Mother's Day cards with uneven hearts and misspelled words. I didn't think twice. "Of course," I'd replied. "Come home." Claire warned me immediately. From her apartment in California, her voice carried that familiar mixture of love and frustration only a daughter can have. "Mom's too soft," she told her husband, not knowing I could hear her in the background. Then, louder, directly to me. "They'll take advantage of you, Mom. Marcus hasn't changed. But hope is a stubborn thing. It grows roots deep inside you, even when the soil is cracked and dry." I told myself that maybe this time would be different, that maybe losing his job and struggling like this would be the wake-up call Marcus needed. For a little while, I even believed it. Buddy believed in me before I believed in myself. Dogs have a strange way of sensing sadness. They lean into it, cushion it, try to spread their warmth over it like a blanket. Buddy followed me from room to room those first few weeks, never letting me out of his sight. Sometimes I'd catch him staring at Marcus and Vanessa with a wary stiffness in his posture, and I'd gently rub behind his ears, whispering, "It's okay, sweetheart. They're just adjusting." But deep down, his tension echoed something I already felt but refused to admit. The demands started small. I hardly noticed them at first. Marcus asked for a little money for interviews. Vanessa asked me to watch over their schedules while they organized their next steps. They began moving their things into the master bedroom after a single night on the pull-out couch. Just while we settle in, Vanessa had said as she draped her dress bags across my closet rod. I swallowed my discomfort and smiled. There seemed to be no end to the things I told myself were harmless. But small things don't stay small. They grow teeth. Within weeks, the tone in the house changed. Marcus became irritated over everything: how I folded towels, how I seasoned food, how slowly I moved up the stairs. Vanessa wasn't far behind, rolling her eyes at my old-fashioned habits, sighing loudly whenever I asked a question, making me feel like an intruder in my own home. Then the yelling started. It was like living beside a pair of thunderstorms, loud, unpredictable, ready to strike at any moment. They screamed at me for not having dinner ready, mocked the way I hummed while cooking, lectured me about modern living as if I were a clueless child. There were days I barely recognized the house. The kitchen where I used to bake Christmas cookies became a battleground of demands. The living room where I'd once read peacefully with Buddy lying across my feet now echoed with sharp voices and slammed doors. Still, I tried to smile. I tried to understand. I tried to believe that stress was making them act this way, that we were just going through an adjustment period. I clung to that good-hearted optimism like it was the last piece of driftwood in a storm. Buddy never believed the excuse. When Marcus raised his voice, Buddy would leave the room. When Vanessa threw her hands up in exasperation, Buddy would stand by me, placing himself between us like a quiet barrier. His presence comforted me, his loyalty grounding me even as my confidence eroded. Then came the moment I still have trouble thinking about without feeling my stomach twist. It was a week ago, late afternoon. I was washing dishes when Vanessa strolled into the kitchen with that casual condescension she'd perfected. "You know," she said lightly, flipping her hair behind her shoulder, "you should consider signing the house over to us. For tax purposes. It'd make everything so much easier." She said it the way someone might comment on the weather, as if handing over the home my husband and I built together was a simple errand like dropping off dry cleaning. I stood there, hands submerged in soapy water, and felt something inside me go very still. I didn't answer her. I didn't trust my voice not to crack or break or spill something fragile I wasn't ready to expose. That evening, I told myself the same lie I'd been repeating for weeks. They're just stressed. They don't mean it. It will get better. But lies crumble fast when confronted with pain. And everything changed the night Buddy cried out in agony. It happened in an instant. One sharp sound. The kind that slices the air like glass. I was across the room when I heard it, my heart leaping into my throat. Buddy's yelp was high and strangled, a sound I'd never heard from him before. It wasn't just pain, it was fear. I turned and saw Marcus's foot retracting, Buddy stumbling sideways, his tail tucked tightly beneath him. The world narrowed into a thin tunnel. I remember the cold shock racing through my body, the instinctive step I took toward my dog, the words forming on my tongue. "What are you doing?" I didn't get to finish. Marcus's hand struck my cheek so fast I didn't fully register it until the burn spread across my skin, until the metallic taste filled my mouth, until the room tilted. For a moment, everything inside me went quiet. Completely, devastatingly quiet. And in that silence something broke, not like glass shattering, but like a door unlocking. A small, powerful click. The illusion, the one I'd been clinging to with white knuckles, fell away. My good heart had been used against me. My kindness taken as weakness. My home turned into a place of fear. Buddy whimpered softly on the floor, and when I knelt to gather him into my arms, something inside me hardened with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I finally saw the truth. And once seen, it couldn't be unseen. For Marcus struck me, the world became strangely muffled, as if sound itself had withdrawn from the room, not out of fear, but out of respect for the moment my heart finally split open. I didn't wait for him to say anything. I didn't even look at him. Some instincts are older than thought, older than self-preservation. I scooped Buddy into my arms, feeling the tremble running through his body, and walked slowly, deliberately, to my bedroom. I closed the door gently, then I locked it. The moment the latch clicked, the tears came, not loud, not dramatic, but the kind of tears that feel like they've been waiting a lifetime to fall. They slid down my cheeks soundlessly, warm against the swelling bruise Marcus had left behind. Buddy pressed himself against me, whining softly, his little chest rising and falling in quick, shallow breaths. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, though I didn't even know which of us I meant it for anymore. My voice quivered, fragile and thin, but something beneath it, deep inside, was hardening, solidifying. The pain Marcus had inflicted felt almost secondary to the realization that came with it. I had allowed this. I had opened the door. I had let the storm move in. The bruise on my cheek throbbed, pulsing like a second heartbeat. But the pain in my chest, that was something different. Sharper, more defining. It was the pain of finally recognizing that love alone doesn't save people. That sometimes the people you want to save are the ones hurting you the most. I leaned my forehead against Buddy's and inhaled his familiar scent shampoo, warm fur, the faint trace of the outdoors he loved so much. His presence steadied me, anchored me, kept me from collapsing under the weight of my own self-reproach. "I'm done being a victim," I whispered. The words felt foreign and powerful all at once. Buddy's ears twitched as if he understood. I scratched gently behind them and felt, for the first time in months, a flicker of something I've nearly forgotten. Resolve. I waited until the house fell silent, until the shouting ended, until the stomping footsteps faded, until the darkness settled heavily around us. Then I moved quietly, slowly, as if careful not to wake the version of myself who might still try to back out at the last second. At 3 a.m., with Buddy curled against my hip, I picked up my phone and dialed the number I'd memorized years ago but never expected to use this way. It rang once before a tired, groggy voice answered. "Hello?" "Robert," I said softly. "It's Sandy." A pause. Then the rustle of sheets as he sat up. "Is everything all right?" "No," I said, "but it will be." Something in my tone must have told him everything he needed to know. He didn't ask why I was calling in the middle of the night. He didn't ask what had happened. He simply listened as I steadied my breathing. "I need your help," I whispered, "and I need you to trust me." "I do," he said without hesitation. "Tell me what you need." By the time I hung up, my hands were trembling, not with fear, but with the raw weight of what I'd set in motion. And yet, I didn't stop. The pain in my cheek had dulled into a slow burn, but inside me, something was blazing awake. By dawn, I had made 6 more calls. Quiet, efficient calls. The kind you make with purpose and without apology. First to Claire, whose voice cracked when she heard the tremor in mine. Then to my bank, to the county clerk, to people whose names Marcus didn't know, whose skills he'd never imagine I had access to, and finally to 3 people Marcus would never expect. The kind of people he'd underestimated his whole life, people who understood boundaries, consequences, and justice. The sun was barely beginning its climb when I ended my last call. I stood in the quiet kitchen, exhaustion pressing into my bones. But underneath that fatigue was a thread of fierce certainty. I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't shrinking. I wasn't offering excuses for someone else's cruelty. I was reclaiming something. My dignity, my home, my voice. Buddy watched me from his spot on the kitchen floor, his tail tapping slowly, thoughtfully, against the tiles. His eyes were filled with an alertness I hadn't seen in weeks, as if he could feel the shift inside me. I started cooking, not because Marcus deserved it, but because I needed the ritual, the grounding, the slow, deliberate act of creating something beautiful, something warm and nourishing before burning down the last remnants of the illusion that had held me prisoner. I prepared steak and eggs, the way Marcus liked them, hot skillets sizzling as the morning light spilled across the counter. I mixed dough for homemade biscuits, my hands moving in steady motions. The smell of butter filled the air. I squeezed oranges until my palms were sticky, the juice bright and fragrant. With each task, each measured movement, I felt more myself, more awake, more certain of what came next. When Marcus finally came downstairs, his footsteps heavy, the table was set as if for a celebration. He stared at the spread with wide eyes before his lips curled into a cruel, familiar smirk. "Well, well," he said, arms stretched in a mocking gesture. "Finally, you learned your place, old woman." The words should have hurt. They didn't. I stood still, breathing slowly, my hands calm at my sides. Buddy sat beside me, watching Marcus with that same steady, wary gaze he'd worn the night everything changed. Then the air shifted. I saw awareness flash in Marcus's eyes before he even turned. There's a particular silence that accompanies consequence, a tightening of the room, a sudden pull of gravity. From the living room, footsteps approached. Marcus turned, and there, stepping calmly into view, was Robert Chun. He adjusted his suit jacket, his posture measured, his expression neutral but resolute. He had already been waiting, quiet, unseen, prepared, just as we'd planned. My son's smugness didn't just fade. It crumbled, and in the space where his arrogance had been, something new flickered across his face. Fear. I could feel my heartbeat trembling in my chest as Robert adjusted his glasses and opened his briefcase, the quiet click of the metal latches sounding louder than it should have. I stood beside the kitchen counter, pretending I was steady, pretending my hands weren't shaking, pretending the bruise on my cheek wasn't still pulsing like a second heartbeat. Buddy pressed against my leg, his warm body grounding me in a way nothing else could. "Mr. Marcus Calloway," Robert began, his professional tone slicing through the tension. "I'm here to inform you that your mother is transferring ownership of this property." For a split second, the air shifted. Marcus's entire face brightened with greedy triumph. His smile spread, slow and self-assured, like he'd been waiting years for this moment. He leaned back in the chair he'd dragged across my kitchen floor like he owned the place, arms crossing over his chest as if he were settling in to enjoy a reward he'd earned. "About time, Mom," he said with a laugh so smug it made my stomach twist. "I knew you'd—" "To a family trust that explicitly excludes you," Robert finished, his voice calm, firm, immovable. The words landed in the room like a dropped stone, heavy, final, irreversible. Silence stretched across the kitchen, thick and almost physical. Buddy's tail thumped softly against my leg, the small, steady rhythm somehow louder than Marcus's heavy breathing as his expression collapsed from arrogance into stunned confusion. Then, from the hallway, a frantic voice cracked through the stillness. "You can't do that!" Vanessa screeched as she stumbled into the room, her eyes wild, her hair unbrushed like she'd been eavesdropping and waiting for the right moment to explode. "We have rights!" Robert didn't even blink. "Actually, Mrs. Calloway," he said, sliding a stack of documents across the table with calm precision. "You have no rights to property you don't own." Vanessa's mouth opened, but no words came out. She stood there panting, her face flushed deep red, hands curling into fists at her sides. I hadn't said a word yet, not since all of this began. A strange quietness had settled inside me, one that felt powerful rather than fearful. My voice may have trembled earlier in the night, but now it rose with surprising steadiness. "You have 30 days to vacate," I said softly, each word falling from my lips with the weight of truth I had carried far too long. Marcus's head snapped toward me. Rage twisted his features, contorting them into something almost unrecognizable, something crueler than I'd ever let myself admit. His nostrils flared, and his fists clenched on the table as if he were resisting the urge to flip it over. "After everything I've done for you?" he spat, his voice trembling with offense, as though he were the victim in all of this. The absurdity of his accusation hit me like a cold wave. I breathed in slowly, letting the truth gather strength in my chest. "You mean after everything you've stolen from me?" Marcus blinked, caught off guard. He sputtered, trying to find footing, trying to rebuild whatever manipulation he believed he still had power to use. But I didn't give him time. I nodded to Robert. Calmly, deliberately, Robert reached into his briefcase again and withdrew a set of organized, clipped-together documents papers I had stared at in disbelief only hours earlier. He laid them on the table, each page a record of betrayal I had forced myself to confront. "These," Robert said as he spread out the bank statements, "are records of $47,000 in unauthorized withdrawals made using your mother's debit card." Each number glared up from the page withdrawals I had blamed on my own forgetfulness, on miscalculations, on aging. Each ATM receipt felt like a small wound that I had never understood. Now they sat there like pieces of a larger truth I had refused to see. Marcus pushed his chair back so abruptly that it screeched across the tile. "You're lying," he growled, though his voice lacked its usual swagger. "Mom, tell him he's lying. Tell him you'd never accuse your own son of—" "I'm not accusing," I interrupted, my voice cracking only slightly. "I'm acknowledging." His jaw tightened. A flush crept up his neck, fear, anger, entitlement, all battling in the space behind his eyes. Vanessa wrapped her arms around herself, shifting from foot to foot. For once, she wasn't shouting. She wasn't smirking. She looked scared. "It wasn't like that," Marcus muttered, looking anywhere but at the evidence. "It was exactly like that," I whispered. My hands trembled, not from fear anymore, but from release, like my body didn't quite know how to behave without the weight of silence pressing down on me. I reached down and ran my fingers through Buddy's soft fur. He leaned into me, licking the side of my hand as if he could feel every hurt I was finally letting go of. In that moment, I realized something profound. I wasn't fighting Marcus anymore. I wasn't trying to justify myself or earn his love or pretend we were a family. I was simply telling the truth he had run from, the truth he had relied on me being too afraid to speak. Robert kept his gaze steady on Marcus. "You have 30 days to collect your belongings and leave this property. Any form of harassment, intimidation, or retaliation will be documented and handled legally." Marcus swallowed hard. The bravado he always carried so effortlessly cracked, splitting open until I could see the small, frightened, furious boy inside the man. The one who had taken without asking. The one who had convinced himself it was owed to him. The one who never expected me to stand tall. "You'll regret this," he whispered, his voice shaking. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time I didn't feel fear or guilt. I felt grief. Grief for the son I wished I'd had. Grief for the years I had bent myself into shapes just to keep the peace. Grief for the woman I had been before I stopped recognizing myself. "No," I said quietly. "I'm finally choosing not to regret anything anymore." Buddy nudged my hand, and I knelt down beside him, letting my forehead rest against his. For a moment, everything else in the room faded. His warm breath, his soft fur, the gentle thump of his tail reminded me that love could still be simple, still be kind, still be safe. When I rose again, I felt taller. Marcus stared at me like he didn't know who I was. Maybe he didn't. Maybe he had never cared to know. But I knew myself now, and that was enough. "Let's go, Vanessa," he muttered, pushing past her. But she didn't move. Not right away. Her eyes darted between me and Marcus, and for a brief second, something like regret flickered across her face. Or maybe it was only fear of losing the comfort she had grown accustomed to. Either way, she eventually hurried after him, leaving only the echo of their footsteps behind. When the door slammed shut, the kitchen felt impossibly quiet. My legs trembled beneath me and I exhaled a shaky breath I had been holding for years. Robert closed his briefcase with a soft click. "You did well," he said gently. I nodded, though tears were already gathering at the corners of my eyes. I finally did what I should have done a long time ago. I wasn't just reclaiming my house, I was reclaiming myself. Marcus was still sputtering denials, tripping over his own outrage, when the front door opened. The sound of it, a firm push, a purposeful entry cut through his babbling like a blade. I turned toward the foyer, breath caught in my chest, and there she was, Claire. My daughter stood framed in the doorway, her hair pulled back hastily, eyes rimmed with exhaustion from travel. Behind her was a uniformed police officer. The moment Claire's gaze fell on my bruised face, something inside her broke. Her hand rose to her mouth, trembling, and her eyes filled instantly, tears and fury rising together in a storm that I had seen only a few times in her life. Always when she sensed someone she loved was being hurt. "Officer Martinez is here to document the assault from last night," Claire said, her voice shaking with barely contained anger. Hearing the word assault made something twist inside me. It was the truth. I knew it. But hearing my daughter say it aloud felt like being cracked open. "Mom!" she breathed, closing the distance between us in 3 quick steps. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her arms wrapped around me before I could answer. She held me like I was fragile, like one wrong movement would break me further. Buddy, who had been anxiously glued to my leg, pushed himself firmly between us, leaning into both of us at once as if anchoring the moment, reminding us that he, too, had survived something. I closed my eyes and let myself lean into her, inhaling the familiar scent of her hair, the faint hint of airport air lingering on her clothes. The question echoed again. Why didn't I tell her? It swelled in my mind until the truth rose, heavy and painful. "I was ashamed," I whispered against her shoulder. "I didn't want you to think I'd failed. As a mother. As a woman." Claire pulled back just enough to cut my cheek gently, careful of the bruise. Her eyes glistened, angry tears slipping down her face. "Mom, no! You did not fail. He did. You survived him. That's strength, not failure." Her words washed over me like warm water, and for a moment my knees almost gave way. I had spent so long swallowing my pain, masking it, rationalizing it, that hearing someone name it with such clarity made me tremble. Officer Martinez stepped forward, professional but kind-eyed, holding a small digital camera. "Mrs. Calloway, would it be all right if I photographed your injuries now?" I nodded. Claire stayed right beside me, one arm wrapped protectively around my back as if shielding me from the camera's lens, even though she knew this was necessary. Buddy whined softly, pressing into my calf, sensing my discomfort. The click of the camera froze the moment, the swollen cheek, the faint purple spreading under my skin, the slight cut near my temple. Evidence, proof of what I had endured. Proof I could no longer hide behind excuses. "Now, your statement," Officer Martinez said gently. "Please describe what happened last night." The words lodged in my throat at first. Saying it out loud would make it real. No more softening, no more internal rewriting to make it hurt less. I felt Claire's hand slide into mine. I squeezed it. "Marcus kicked Buddy," I began, my voice trembling despite my best efforts. "He kicked him hard. Buddy was yelping and I tried to stop him. I tried to protect my dog, and Marcus, he hit me. Here," I gestured to the bruise. Officer Martinez nodded, jotting down notes. "Did he threaten you in any way?" My throat tightened. "He told me I should remember who controls this house." Hearing myself say those words made me shiver. Claire inhaled sharply beside me. "And he struck you with his hand or fist?" "His fist." My voice cracked. I fell into the wall. Buddy was barking and crying. He was so scared. Officer Martinez's jaw tightened just slightly. "Thank you, Mrs. Calloway. I know this isn't easy." Before I could respond, Marcus scoffed loudly from across the room, rolling his eyes as though this were all a terrible inconvenience to him. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "She's exaggerating. She's always been dramatic. She probably fell or bumped into something, and now she's blaming me." The words stung more than they should have, but Claire reacted before I could. She turned on him, her voice sharp and cutting. "The veterinary report on Buddy's injured ribs says otherwise." With a swift motion, she pulled documents from her bag pages she had clearly printed before even boarding her flight. She slammed them onto the kitchen counter, her hand trembling with controlled rage. Marcus's face lost its color. His eyes darted to the papers, then away, then back again. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw something crack through his facade. Fear. He swallowed hard, the sound audible in the thick silence that followed. Claire stared him down as though she had spent years waiting for the moment he'd face consequences for the damage he'd caused. Officer Martinez stepped between them, calm but authoritative. "Sir," the officer said firmly, "you will refrain from interrupting or attempting to influence this statement. Everything documented today may be used in further legal review." Marcus looked like he was about to argue, but something in Martinez's tone, or the sight of his badge, forced him to choke down whatever protest he had ready. I looked at my daughter then, at her shaking shoulders, her fierce eyes. The way she kept herself positioned between me and Marcus, as if she could shield me from everything I had endured. My heart swelled with a mixture of gratitude, sorrow, and something warm that had been dormant inside me for too long. When I had called her at 4 a.m, my voice barely above a whisper, she hadn't hesitated. She hadn't questioned me. She hadn't asked whether I might be overreacting. She had simply said, "I'm coming," and then she came without sleep, without delay, without fear. She came because she loved me, because I was her mother, because somewhere along the years of my silence, I had forgotten that I was worth fighting for, but Claire had not. Officer Martinez completed the last of his notes and gently returned the documents Claire had provided. "Mrs. Calloway will move forward with a formal report, and based on the evidence, an emergency protective order is likely to be approved." I nodded, tears blurring my vision. I felt Claire wrap her arm around me again, pulling me close. Buddy leaned into both of us, letting out a soft, relieved sigh as if he too sensed something was finally shifting. Marcus stood off to the side, pale and speechless, his earlier confidence collapsing under the weight of preparation he never saw coming. For the first time in a long, long while, I felt something inside me loosen, like a knot finally untying. I wasn't alone anymore, and he knew it. Vanessa's transformation happened so suddenly it was almost disorienting. One moment she was standing beside Marcus as his silent, watchful accomplice, arms crossed, lips twisted in that permanent expression of disdain she reserved for me. The next, her voice cracked through the room like a shrill, panicked siren. "I told you not to touch her!" she shrieked, stepping away from him as if he were something toxic. "I told you this would happen, Marcus. I told you." Her voice was thin and frantic, the sound of someone watching their world collapse faster than they could gather the pieces. For a moment, even Marcus looked stunned, his eyebrows lifting in disbelief. "Shut up, Vanessa," he hissed, but there was fear beneath the anger, real fear this time, not the performative bluster he used to control the room. I stood quietly, my hand resting on Buddy's back, watching the cracks widen between them the moment consequences entered the picture. It was strange, almost surreal, to witness the two of them unraveling. They had always been a united front, loud, demanding, selfish, feeding off each other's entitlement. But now, the house was filled with a new kind of tension, brittle and sharp. Vanessa didn't listen to him. She couldn't. Panic had its claws in her now. She rushed toward me, grabbing my arm with hands that trembled so much I could feel the vibration through my sleeve. "Sandy, please," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "I didn't know he'd hurt you, I swear. Marcus gets angry, but I never thought we just needed money temporarily. That's all this was." Buddy stepped protectively between us, ears pinned back, body stiff. He didn't trust her. And in that moment, neither did I. I looked at Vanessa, really looked at her. The woman who had mocked my cooking, scoffed at my old-fashioned decorating, criticized Buddy's shedding, laughed at my age, and treated my home as if I were the guest. The woman who had watched Marcus scream at me, who had joined in the ridicule, who had taken the master bedroom as if she was entitled to it. Now she stood before me, bleary-eyed, desperate, clinging to apologies that came only when her comfort was threatened. "Temporarily?" I repeated, my voice quiet, steady, almost gentle. "Is that why you forged my signature on the reverse mortgage application?" The word slipped into the air like a feather and hit her like a hammer. Vanessa's whole body jolted. Her eyes went wide, so wide I could see the whites all around her irises. Shock, confusion, betrayal, and a flicker of terror all tangled across her face. "What?" she breathed. "Marcus. What is she talking about?" Marcus's jaw tightened. I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. Frantic, sloppy. He grabbed his jacket, movements jerky, desperate to escape the tightening noose of accountability. "I'm leaving," he announced, voice brittle. "This is insane." He took 2 steps toward the door before Robert moved smoothly into his path, blocking the exit. Robert wasn't physically imposing in the traditional sense, more lean than broad. But in that moment, he seemed unmovable, like a pillar carved from something ancient and immovable. "I wouldn't recommend that, Mr. Calloway," he said calmly, but there was steel beneath every syllable. "The district attorney's office has some questions about financial elder abuse." Marcus froze. His face drained of color so quickly it almost frightened me. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then the distant sound of tires on gravel reached us, a low rumble, a door shutting, and another. A second police car pulled up outside. Vanessa's breath caught. Marcus's shoulders slumped as if something inside him finally gave out. And in that moment, watching him realize that the consequences he'd avoided his entire life had finally arrived, I felt a strange blend of sadness and relief twist inside me. Sadness, because he was my son, and no mother dreams of seeing her child face the legal consequences of their cruelty. Relief, because it was finally happening. The truth was no longer mine alone to carry. The world could see it now. The law could see it. Claire could see it. Even Vanessa could no longer deny it. Marcus turned toward me then, his expression a mixture of fury and disbelief, as if I had betrayed him simply by refusing to be his victim any longer. But I didn't flinch. I didn't shrink. I didn't apologize. I simply stood there with Buddy leaning against my leg, Claire at my side, and the bruise on my cheek glowing like a badge of truth. For the first time, I saw Marcus clearly not the sweet boy I'd loved, not the young man I'd hoped would find redemption, but the person he had chosen to become. Someone who hurt others to avoid confronting his own failures. Someone who used manipulation like a shield. Someone who believed my good heart would always be his to exploit. Not anymore. Vanessa stepped back from him, hands trembling at her sides, her breath hitching in rapid, shallow bursts. "Marcus, what did you do?" she whispered, as if the truth were only just now coming into focus. He didn't answer her. He couldn't. The flashing lights outside illuminated the windows with cold, blue light. Officers stepped out of the car. I could hear their radios crackling, the murmur of their voices as they approached the house. Buddy let out a soft, low growl, not out of aggression, but recognition. He knew what was coming. Animals always sense when a tide has changed. As footsteps approached the front door, Marcus looked around wildly, his bravado crumbling into something raw and exposed. Vanessa covered her mouth with both hands, eyes brimming with tears she hadn't been able to muster for me, but could now summon instantly for her collapsing future. I stood still, centered, calm. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt the ground beneath my feet as something solid, supportive. Like the earth itself had finally shifted to stand with me instead of under me. The knock came firm, official, undeniable. And Marcus finally understood. He wasn't going anywhere. The moment Officer Martinez stepped aside to call for backup, the room shifted again, another tremor in a day full of emotional earthquakes. Vanessa crumpled into the nearest chair as if her legs had simply given out. The sound she made wasn't elegant or rehearsed. It wasn't one of those dramatic wails she used to throw during arguments to get Marcus's attention. This was different. Raw, unfiltered, almost childlike. "I didn't know about any forgery," she cried, burying her face in her hands. "I swear on my life, Sandy, I didn't know. Her shoulders shook in jagged rhythms. It would have been easy to roll my eyes, to assume she was performing the way she always did. But something in her voice tugged at a softer part of me, the one I'd tried so hard to silence lately so I could stay strong. There was a tremor in her tone, a cracking truth that didn't feel calculated or convenient. I had spent my whole life observing people with quiet attentiveness, at church, in the volunteer groups, through years of rescuing dogs, through an entire marriage where silence taught me more than words ever could. I knew when someone was putting on a show, and this didn't feel like a show. She wasn't covering for Marcus or defending him. She wasn't angry at me. She was broken and genuinely confused. I knelt beside Buddy, letting my fingers slide into his fur as I steadied myself. "Vanessa," I said softly, "when did Marcus tell you about his gambling debts?" Her head jerked upward as if I'd slapped her. "What gambling debts?" she whispered, eyes wide with a kind of terror that was different from the fear of the police or the consequences. This was the fear of realizing the foundation of her life was made of lies. Robert, ever prepared, clicked open another section of his briefcase. He pulled out a stack of papers, each one more damning than the last. He laid them neatly on the table as if he were presenting evidence in court. "Your husband owes $9,000, Robert stated matter-of-factly, to multiple online betting platforms and one private lender in Hartford who is, to put it mildly, not known for his patience or his legality." Vanessa's lips parted, but no sound came out. She blinked rapidly, her breath catching like a child trying not to cry. "Marcus?" she finally managed, turning toward him with slow, hesitant disbelief. "You told me your job fired you unfairly, that your supervisor hated you. You told me we just needed a little time to get back on our feet. You swore." Her voice broke and she pressed a shaking hand against her chest. "You swore all of this was temporary." Marcus's face twisted, anger, desperation, the familiar cocktail he always wore when the truth backed him into a corner. "No, everything I did was for us," he roared. "For you, for our future." But even he didn't sound convinced. The words hung in the air, flimsy and incomplete. Vanessa stood slowly, her legs trembling. I could almost see the moment reality settled over her like a freezing sheet of water. "No," she whispered. "You were using me, just like you used your mother. You lied to both of us." Her whole body trembled, but not with fear. This time, it was betrayal. Deep, cutting, personal. Betrayal has a way of hollowing out a person from the inside, scooping out the certainty they thought they could rely on. I'd lived long enough to recognize the look. I'd worn it once myself. She turned toward me, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. "Sandy," she whispered. I'm so sorry. I thought we were struggling. I thought he was trying. Her voice cracked again. I didn't know he was gambling it all away. I swear I didn't. Something in me softened. It didn't erase the months of mistreatment, the insults, the entitlement, or the way she and Marcus had taken over my house as if I were some inconvenience in their grand plan. But remorse is a powerful thing when it's real. And I had the strange sensation of watching a woman wake up from a long, toxic dream. Buddy must have felt it too, because he walked over to her, slowly, cautiously, and nudged his snout against her hand. Vanessa looked down at him as if she couldn't believe it. Her breath hitched as she let her fingers rest lightly on his fur, not quite petting, just accepting. That small gesture broke whatever was left in her. She sobbed again, but quieter this time, the sound of a heart unspooling after years of tension. I glanced toward Marcus. He looked furious, not just at the situation, but at us, at the unity forming among the very people he had tried to pit against each other. Manipulators hate when their victims begin speaking to one another, hate when secrets unravel, hate when their influence fades. Stop looking at me like I'm some monster, he snapped. This family has always expected too much of me. Claire scoffed from across the room, but I stayed silent, watching Vanessa sink deeper into the reality she'd never seen before. Marcus, she whispered, voice trembling. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell me you owed that much? Because you would have freaked out, he said defensively. I'm freaking out now, she cried. Their voices clashed, but for the first time, Vanessa's wasn't forced or sharp. It was honest. A gut-level plea from a woman who realized she'd been living in a story Marcus crafted to keep her compliant. I reached out gently, touching Vanessa's shoulder. She flinched out of habit, not from me, and then she let out a shaky breath. Vanessa, I said softly, you deserved the truth. Her eyes filled again. I thought I was helping him. I thought I was helping you. I never wanted all this. I know. And surprisingly, I did. I didn't excuse her past behavior, but I understood the desperation of someone drowning in a life they didn't fully comprehend. Outside, more car doors slammed. Backup had arrived. The sound carried through the open windows like a cold announcement of the next chapter neither of them could escape. Vanessa wiped her face with trembling fingers and looked at Marcus as if seeing him for the first time, not the man she defended, or excused, or endured, but the man he truly was. A man who lied. A man who used. A man who gambled away both money and relationships as if neither held any value. Officer Martinez re-entered the room, his voice steady as he updated the situation. Vanessa didn't look away from Marcus. Her voice came out quiet, thin, but unwavering. You broke us, she whispered. Not your job, not your mother, not the world. You. And Marcus for once had no reply. The officers stepped inside, their expressions professional, their presence grounding. Buddy returned to my side, leaning his warm body against my leg, as if reminding me I wasn't alone, not anymore. The truth had finally surfaced, and it was only the beginning. I watched Vanessa unravel right in front of me, her shoulders folding inward, as if someone had clipped invisible strings that had been holding her upright. Her sobs were the raw, keening kind that come from a soul suddenly stripped of its last illusion. For a moment, I simply stood there watching her crumble, feeling a strange and familiar tightening inside my chest. Not pity, but something deeper and older. A pull I had spent my entire life fighting. The instinct to comfort. The instinct to mother. Even those who had hurt me. Claire tightened her grip on my arm like a warning. Mom, don't you dare feel sorry for her, she said, her voice cracking with a mixture of anger and fear. Fear that I would slip into old patterns. Fear that I would abandon myself again for the sake of someone else. I could feel her trembling just a little, the way she always did when she tried to be braver than her heart allowed. But Claire didn't understand something I had only learned after 60 years of bruises, disappointments, and tiny miracles that had kept me going. I could be strong and compassionate at the same time. Strength did not require cruelty. Compassion did not require surrender. I turned toward Vanessa, who was hunched over in the dining room chair Marcus had flung backward earlier in his tantrum. Her hands were shaking so violently, she kept missing her own cheeks when she tried to wipe away her tears. She looked like a woman who had just discovered she had been living in a house built entirely of lies, and suddenly all the walls had caved in on top of her. "Vanessa," I said softly, firmly, the way you speak to someone standing on the edge of a cliff. "Look at me." Her red-rimmed eyes lifted, glassy and swollen. She looked younger in that moment, stripped of the cruelty she had wielded in the past. Just a terrified woman who had hitched her life to the wrong man and was now watching the cost unfold in real time. "You participated in my abuse," I said, letting each word land without cruelty but without hesitation. "Whether you knew all the facts or not, you stood there and let it happen." Her lower lip quivered, and she nodded with a kind of miserable acceptance. "I know," she whispered. I'm so sorry, Sandy. I swear I didn't know how bad it was. I swear I didn't know he—" She couldn't finish. The sentence collapsed inside her. I took a slow breath, steadying myself. But I continued gently. "I believe you when you say you didn't know about the forgery, or the full extent of Marcus's deception." Marcus jerked against Officer Martinez's grip, his face twisting into something feral. "Are you kidding me?" he spat. "You're defending her now?" I ignored him. I'd spent enough years letting his anger dictate my movements. That part of my life was over. I stepped closer to Vanessa, aware of Buddy's warm weight pressing against my leg as he followed, ever watchful. His soft whine vibrated through me like a grounding note. Even he, with his battered ribs, had shown her more kindness than she had ever shown him, and yet he sensed her remorse before any of us had. Maybe that meant something. "Vanessa," I said, "I'm going to offer you something." Her brows knitted together, confusion flickering across her face. "I'll help you get on your feet," I said, hearing Claire inhale sharply beside me. "A one-time payment, enough for first and last month's rent somewhere safe. And I'll write you a letter of recommendation for jobs." The room froze. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Vanessa's mouth opened slightly, as if the words were too unreal to process. She looked from me to Claire, then back again, searching my face for any sign of mockery or trickery. "But," I added, making sure my voice didn't waver, "I will only do this if you testify truthfully about everything you witnessed Marcus do. Every threat, every injury, every lie, everything." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Marcus exploded. "You're choosing her side?" he yelled, trying to lunge forward again, but Officer Martinez held him firmly, forcing him back with calm, practiced strength. "She's lying! She's lying to save herself! You can't seriously believe—" "Marcus," the officer warned, tightening his grip. Vanessa flinched at the sound of Marcus's voice, as if she had been slapped. She looked at him the same way someone might look at a beautiful painting that had suddenly peeled back to reveal rot underneath. I watched the realization wash over her, layer by layer. The manipulation, the lies, the way he had twisted her loyalty into a tool he could use against others. She turned to me again. Her chest was rising and falling too quickly, like her body couldn't quite keep up with her heart. I don't know what to do," she whispered. "Yes, you do," I said softly. "You know exactly what to do. You've always known. You just finally have the chance." Buddy stepped closer to her, nudging her hand again with a gentleness that made her break down all over. She covered her mouth with her trembling fingers, letting out a sound that was half sob and half confession. Claire shook her head in disbelief, muttering, "Unreal. Absolutely unreal. but I kept my eyes on Vanessa. "You're not choosing me," I told her. "You're choosing the truth." For the first time, slowly, painfully, Vanessa straightened. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, inhaled shakily, and nodded. "I'll tell the truth," she whispered, voice cracking but clear. "All of it." And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something inside my chest loosen. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But the first fragile thread of something like hope. The quiet kind. The kind that grows only when someone finally decides to stop living in the dark. The next 3 weeks felt like watching the tide slowly reveal everything a storm had buried. Every day, some new truth surfaced. Another document, another account, another shameful detail about what Marcus had done behind walls I had once believed were ours. Financial exploitation, attempted fraud, assault, animal abuse. Words that looked clinical on paper, but carried a lifetime of ache for a mother who still remembered the softness of his small hand wrapped around her finger when he was 3 years old. I kept wondering how we had traveled from that tender beginning to this bitter, monstrous end. Detectives came and went. County investigators combed through bank statements, loan applications, surveillance footage from the night he hit me. Vanessa's testimony filled in the gaps with trembling honesty, the late-night arguments over money, the quiet moments when she'd noticed things she'd been too afraid to question. The way Marcus had grown more desperate, more volatile, like someone balancing on a cliff with no intention of stepping back. She was crucial, they said. She was the piece that made the case whole. I nodded, but every time I signed another document or sat through another interview, I couldn't help thinking how surreal it all felt. My son, my only son, reduced to a list of charges spoken by strangers in measured tones. True to my word, I helped Vanessa find a small apartment across town. It wasn't luxurious, but it was safe and quiet, with 2 windows that let in morning light and a tiny kitchen she seemed oddly excited about. I didn't ask why. Sometimes people cling to the smallest symbols of control when they're rebuilding themselves. I even reached out to a local nonprofit where I volunteered years ago, explaining Vanessa's background as a social worker, her empathy, her training, her potential. They interviewed her, hesitantly at first, then with growing warmth. When they offered her the job, she cried so hard she couldn't speak, just pressed her hands to her face as if the world had suddenly widened around her. On moving days, she stood in her almost empty living room, surrounded by 2 boxes and a thrift store lamp she'd found on clearance. She turned to me with a vulnerability I had never seen on her face before. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself." She knelt to hug Buddy, who wagged his tail and licked her cheek with the kind of gentle acceptance only dogs seem capable of. "I won't waste this chance," she said into his fur as if promising him as much as promising me. I believed her, and I knew, maybe for the first time, that she believed herself. Marcus took a plea deal in the end. His lawyer called Robert with the details. 2 years in prison, 5 years probation, mandatory therapy for anger management and gambling addiction, a permanent restraining order barring him from contacting me ever again. When I heard the verdict, there was no triumph in me, no satisfaction in knowing justice had been served, only an aching silence, like something inside me had gone terribly still. Claire wanted to celebrate. She bought sparkling cider and walked into the kitchen with forced cheer, but when she saw my face, she paused. "Mom," she said softly, "you look like you just lost someone." I swallowed, staring at the bubbles rising lazily in the bottle she set on the counter. "I did," I whispered. "I lost the son I thought I had, and maybe the son I wish he had become." Claire's expression softened with a kind of tenderness that reminded me she was still, beneath her fierce protectiveness, just a child wanting to make things right for her mother. "You gave him every opportunity," she said, brushing a loose curl behind her ear. "More than most people could even dream of. But some people have to hit rock bottom before they can climb back up." I nodded, though a part of me wondered if 2 years in prison would be enough to break through the storm knotted inside him. Or if rock bottom for Marcus was still lower, still waiting somewhere beneath the consequences he now faced. I couldn't save him from that descent anymore. Maybe I was never meant to. When the dust finally settled, the house felt different. Quiet, yes, but for the first time in years, it was a peaceful quiet. No tension, no footsteps paced in anger, no sharp inhalations bracing for the next outburst. Just the soft hum of the refrigerator, the faint rustle of leaves outside the window, and Buddy's steady breathing as he stretched contentedly across the living room rug. Sometimes I would stand in the doorway and just breathe. Long, deep breaths that filled me in ways I hadn't realized I'd been starving for. Robert came by on a Thursday afternoon with a thick folder and that calm smile of his that always carried a hint of respect. "We finalized the trust," he said, placing it gently on the table. "Everything is protected now, irrevocable and locked, completely shielded from future claims." I touched the edge of the folder, feeling its weight. "And Claire? Your assets will pass to her and your grandchildren," he said. "Exactly as you wanted." For the first time in weeks, I felt something warm glow inside my chest. Not joy, not yet, but relief, a soft, healing relief that felt like sunlight finding its way through clouds that had hung over me far too long. That night, Buddy curled next to me on the couch as I stroked his fur. His ribs were almost fully healed, though he still winced sometimes when he moved too quickly. I leaned down and whispered into the soft fur between his ears. "We made it," I said. "We're safe now." Buddy looked up, eyes wise and knowing, and rested his head on my lap. And in that small, quiet moment, I understood something Claire had been trying to tell me. Something I had always resisted. Sometimes survival isn't loud or triumphant. Sometimes it's just the gentle beginning of peace. 6 months later, I found myself standing barefoot in my garden, the cool grass brushing gently against my ankles as Buddy trotted beside me with that familiar, contented sway in his tail. The air was warm with the lingering touch of late spring, and the sky above us was painted in wide strokes of gold and rose pink, as if some patient hand had brushed away every last remnant of winter to make room for something gentler, something new. The Connecticut breeze carried the faint scent of lilacs from the bushes I'd trimmed just that morning, and for a quiet moment I simply stood there, breathing deeply, letting the colors of the fading day fill the empty spaces inside me that I had once thought were beyond repair. Buddy nudged my hand with his wet nose, urging me to keep walking. He'd grown stronger, healthier, his ribs fully healed and his spirit brighter than ever. And, in a strange way, his recovery had mirrored my own. Claire visited often now, more than she ever had before all this happened. Not out of obligation or worry, but simply because the space between us had softened. Because she no longer felt the weight of that unspoken question, "Why didn't you tell me sooner, Mom?" hanging between us like a fragile thread. Forgiveness had become a quiet, dependable companion, woven into every conversation we shared, every moment she brushed a strand of hair from my face, every time she walked through the front door without knocking. And of course, she brought my grandchildren, their laughter bright and melodic, their feet pounding across the lawn as Buddy chased them, barking joyfully as if they were the greatest gifts life had ever given him. Watching them together reminded me of a truth I had forgotten. Joy doesn't always come with ceremony. Sometimes it comes in the shape of muddy shoes, sticky fingers, and the sound of a dog rolling in the grass, refusing to let the past define his delight. Vanessa sent updates too. Short messages at first, hesitant, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to share her progress. Then longer ones, filled with cautious optimism, therapy sessions that were helping, volunteer work she'd started at the nonprofit, and finally the day she told me she'd been promoted. The word itself held a quiet triumph. Her confidence was coming back piece by piece, like a fragile sculpture being restored with careful hands. There were still shadows, of course, guilt, grief, the remnants of years spent in a house where truth had been twisted into something unrecognizable. But she was rebuilding, and she was doing it honestly. That mattered, maybe more than she knew. It mattered to me. I had begun rebuilding too, in my own way. I'd started a support group at my church for elderly victims of family exploitation, a topic people still whispered about in the corners of community rooms, as if shame belonged to the ones harmed rather than the ones doing the harming. At first, only 3 women showed up, then 5, then 9. And soon the circle of chairs grew too small for the room we'd been using. I watched as those women found their voices, shaky at first, then steadier as each story was met not with judgment but with compassion. I watched them straighten their backs, lift their chins, breathe more deeply. When they said thank you, I shook my head every time, because I wasn't saving them. I was simply holding out a light in the dark they'd been walking alone. They were the ones choosing to follow it. One evening, as Buddy and I stood together in the garden, watching the horizon melt into soft twilight, I reached down and stroked his golden fur. He leaned into my touch with that quiet trust that always made something warm crack open inside me. "You know what I learned, Buddy?" I murmured, my voice barely above the whisper of wind weaving through the leaves. "Being kind doesn't mean being weak." He looked up at me, brown eyes glistening with the sort of understanding only animals seem capable of, that pure, unfiltered empathy unburdened by human fear or pride. For so many years I had confused love with erasure. I believed that loving someone meant letting them take whatever they wanted from me, my time, my money, my patience, my dignity. I believed grit meant silence and sacrifice, that a good mother should endure anything for her children, even if it meant losing pieces of herself in the process. But that terrible night, when Marcus kicked Buddy hard enough to crack a rib and struck me across the face with the back of his hand, something in me had snapped cleanly, decisively. A breaking isn't always a tragedy. Sometimes it's the first step toward liberation. That was the moment I realized compassion is not submission. That I could love without allowing myself to be destroyed by someone else's darkness. That boundaries weren't walls, they were doors I was allowed to close when someone walked toward me with harm instead of love. The woman who served that feast 6 months ago, the dinner that Marcus and Vanessa believed was a gesture of surrender, was not the trembling, invisible mother they had known. She wasn't setting a trap. She was delivering a truth neither of them had been willing to face. I was done disappearing inside my own home, done shrinking myself so others could stretch into every inch of my life, done allowing myself to be the quiet casualty of someone else's wounds. I hadn't served a feast. I had served notice. Buddy barked suddenly, a bright, excited sound that echoed through the yard. A butterfly fluttered past his nose, dancing in the gentle air as if teasing him. He leapt after it with clumsy joy, circling the garden as I laughed, a sound that came icily, now, without the heaviness that used to weigh it down. As the sun dipped below the trees and painted the last streaks of warmth across the sky, I felt something settle inside me, something strong, something whole. I wasn't the same woman I had been. I wasn't the same mother, the same wife, the same version of myself who had once believed silence was safer than truth. Sometimes, the greatest act of love, real love, is refusing to let people destroy themselves, and refusing to let them destroy you. It takes courage to stand firm, courage to walk away, courage to reclaim the pieces of yourself you once handed over in the name of loyalty. I never knew I had that courage until I needed it most. But now I do, and I'll never lose it again. Thank you for listening this story to the end. If it touched you, inspired you, or made you feel something real, I warmly invite you to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story.